Now, on the Mazda CX-5, we have said this before, our pick of the range is the 2.2-litre turbo diesel. And if for some reason you're allergic to diesels, then the next best bet would be the Mazda CX-5 2.5, not the turbo. However, there are some of you who still seem to be averse to slightly higher road tax, even if it contributes to a better overall driving experience. And so, by popular demand, we're reviewing this, the Mazda CX-5 2.0 High, to see if this is all you actually need or if I'm right. Now, it is worth noting that there are two variants of the CX-5 2-litre that you can get. One being the 2.0 mid and this, which is the 2.0 high. Now, between the two, there are essentially no real differences. In fact, if you look at the front, there are no real differences between this and the higher end models. So you still get the chunkier chrome grille surround, you get the updated grille design with more horizontal slats than before. You still get the full LED headlights, replete with an LED indicator, as well as adaptive functioning beam, which basically means that the beam turns with steering wheel input, illuminating more of the corner. Now, a quick aside on the facelift itself, this is the second revision we've seen to the CX-5, and now we've lost the front LED fog lights and we get this much cleaner front bumper look, which I think looks quite smart. It's certainly not as fresh as, say, the new Honda CR-V, but it certainly looks newer than the X70, so I guess that's all right. But it's actually down the side where you'll notice the difference between the 2.5-litre, be it NA, turbo, or the 2.2 diesel, and that is in terms of the wheels. The 2-litre models ride on 17-inch alloy wheels, which look absolutely tiny, and they're wrapped in Continental cross-contact LX Sport tyres. Now, the tyres themselves are pretty good, but it's actually the rims that I'm not really a big fan of because they do make the car look a little bit under-wheeled. Aside from that though, everything here is all standard CX-5, including this lovely pearl white paint. And again, the same gripes continue with this car as we do with other CX-5s, being that I don't need a button, this could have been a touch sensor. However, the Mazda CX-5 does come with walk-away lock, so at least you only have to touch this when you're unlocking the car. Now, the back of the CX-5 2-litre looks exactly the same as other CX-5s, which is a good thing because then no one will know that you bought a lower variant. Now, you get full LED tail lights with this new double C design, which mirrors the LED light signature on the front, which I think looks quite nice. I also appreciate that it goes further into the tailgate because this fixes one of the issues I had with the CX-5 before, which was the back end looked a little bit too feminine. Now, even though this is the 2-litre, you still get dual exhaust pipes and they sound not half bad. Not that that's important on an SUV, but behind this electrically powered tailgate, you will find the same amount of space that you would in any other CX-5, which is more than enough for 5 people's worth of luggage and definitely enough for the emergency inflator kit and the cushion that Mazda likes to give out for free. You also get the standard Burma's coil matting. I don't know who supplies this to them, but I'm sure they're making a pretty penny. And of course, underneath this boot floor, you will find a space saver spare wheel, which means that this is better equipped than the Toyota Vios. Now, inside, you really would be hard-pressed to figure out that this is a lower-end model because as far as the eye can see, everything looks the way it's supposed to. So in terms of material quality, this being a Mazda, it does sit a step above other sort of mainstream SUVs, and so you get lots of soft touch material, you get this lovely stitch material up here. Everything that you feel and touch is not only high quality, but it's also very, very well built, which means driving this car around, you will not hear a single squeak or rattle coming from the car. It's only when you start looking at the finer details will you figure out kind of where some money has been saved. So for example, up ahead, we still get a semi-digital instrument cluster like we do in the rest of the CX-5 range, except the screen is slightly smaller and so it sits in the right side binnacle, whereas higher end models have it sitting right in the center, pretending to be a digital dial. And you also get a slightly smaller center display, although I really do mean slightly. Like, I was in a 2.5 litre earlier this week and I genuinely couldn't tell the difference. Now, this infotainment system notably still uses the older MZD Connect system, which means it has a slightly older interface. Now, while it still works decently well, and of course you have controls for it here, I do loathe the fact that there isn't wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, simply because there's a wireless charger here. And so normally when you have wireless charging, you will want wireless Android Auto, so you don't need a cable. Instead, I've still had to plug my phone in via a cable that sits in this center console. But aside from that, like I said, everything in here still feels pretty good. You still get dual zone climate control, you still get adaptive cruise control, you still get dual electric front seats with memory functionality for the driver. You just don't get the ventilation. You also lose out on the higher end Bose audio system that you get in higher variants of the CX-5, although the audio system in this car is still pretty good. Now, being a Mazda, naturally ergonomics in this car are fantastic. All the buttons fall very easily to hand. It's very easy to figure out where everything is, and of course there is a massive amount of adjustment both in the seat as well as in the steering wheel, so you can get very comfortable. It is worth noting, however, that the CX-5, being a slightly older SUV, requires you to sit a lot more upright than you would in slightly more modern cars. That does take a little bit of adjustment, but once you do get comfortable, well, you're comfortable, right? Now, a lot of people complain about the fact that the Mazda CX-5 is simply not as spacious as other SUVs that you get in this segment. But to that, I will challenge you this. This seat is set up in my driving position. I'm about 170 centimeters, and as you can see, I have a good amount of knee room and a good amount of headroom. And because the front seats are mounted quite high, even when the seat is set low, there's still plenty of space for you to stretch your feet underneath the seat in front of you. On top of that, these seats have not been artificially shortened in order to create the illusion of more space, which means that when I do stretch out like this, I still have very good under-thigh support. I also have a couple of rear aircon vents, which is always very nice, although they are mounted down here and not on the B-pillar, which would have been ideal. I also don't get side blinds, although that is to be expected from this segment, but at least all Burma's cars come as standard with a good amount of tint. And of course, in terms of other amenities back here, you get a couple of bottle holders here, you get cup holders in here, as well as a couple of USB-A ports that hide in this center armrest, which does mean, of course, if you are 3 up back here, you won't have access to those USB ports. ISOFIX mounts can also be found back here on the 2 outer seats, naturally, and they are a little bit more difficult to locate, but at least the doors open quite wide, so it's easy for you to get a child seat in and out. Now, there is one thing I'd like to note about the back end of this car, and it's that material quality has not dropped at all. In a lot of cars, there is a little bit of cost cutting when it comes to the rear half of the cabin where they use slightly cheaper materials, but that is not the case here. All of this is lovely and soft. You still get the stitching up here on the doors as well as down here on the armrest, and it's only from sort of knee height downwards that the plastics get a little bit harder wearing. But overall, this is still a very positive experience. Certainly better than I was expecting from something that does sit on the lower end of the lineup. But the material quality and specifications of a Mazda shouldn't come as a surprise, because Burma has always spec'd out their cars pretty generously. The big question that we're trying to answer here is, again, is that 2 litre up front enough, or am I right and you're better off with the 2.5? Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is the 2 litre high model, which means up front there is a 2 litre 4-cylinder Skyactiv G engine mated to a Skyactiv transmission going to the front wheels. This is essentially the base powertrain specification for this car, although this is not the base model. Now, because this is not the base model, that's why we get things like leather electric seats up front, that's why we get memory functionality, the AFS, as well as the full suite of active safety systems. So before I get into anything else, I'd like to touch on some of the specifications. So the active safety systems, for example, come with things like autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian and cyclist detection. You also get automatic high beam, the swiveling headlights that I mentioned earlier, traffic jam assist, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, lane keep assist, lane departure warning, as well as a 360 camera, which unfortunately, as it is in most Mazdas, is a bit crap. Now, that of course doesn't detract from what this car is, and that is an incredibly solid performer. Now, if you were to buy one of these in town, you will likely not notice the fact that the engine does lose a little bit of puff quite quickly. So for example, if you floor it, it kicks down quite readily and it does launch the car forwards, but it has to go all the way up to the red line to do so. The thing about these Skyactiv engines is the torque curve is very linear, and so in order to get the maximum amount of twist, you really do have to put your foot down. And that is especially the case with this 2-litre. Now, I'm not saying that the CX-5 is a heavy car, but with this 2-litre, it certainly feels like a heavy car because that engine is a lot more audible more of the time. So even when you're just sort of pootling around like I am in sort of suburban streets and stuff like that, you will again hear that engine more than you feel it. But even then, a lot of you will likely be saying that a car like this will most likely be doing just A to B sort of runs. Most people drive cars like the CX-5 from home to work and work to home, and then maybe go out a little bit on the weekends. And for that application, I do think the 2-litre is adequate. And I say that simply because this is a very smooth engine. And so, for example, when you're stuck in traffic, it moves with a certain polish to it, especially with the traffic jam assist. And as a result, it means that progress in this car is usually quite unflustered at those speeds. It's only when you start going a little bit further that you begin to realize that maybe you should have gotten a bigger engine. So for example, my sort of driving, I spend quite a lot of time on the motorway, and so that means quite a lot of motorway cruises. And I do find that because of the slight lack of torque in this 2-litre, the car keeps having to shift down in order to access a little bit more of that torque in order to not just to overtake, but to even maintain speed on the motorway. And that, to me, does detract somewhat from this experience because the CX-5 is otherwise a very solid, very, very well-managed vehicle. This interior, for example, is more upmarket than what I've seen from some luxury car makers, let alone from other vehicles within the same segment. And so with that sort of feeling, that sort of sensation, I kind of expect a slightly more luxurious and more indulgent engine. The 2.5-litre, I have said many, many times before, is perhaps the best engine that Mazda currently makes. Without a turbocharger involved, that 2.5-litre is lovely and smooth, the torque delivery is beautifully creamy, and in terms of fuel economy, it doesn't do that badly either. Whereas in this 2-litre, you just seem to hit the limit a lot faster than you might expect, particularly when you have the car full up of people, full up worth of cargo, for example, and you're trying to take on a long distance drive. It's not that this engine is bad, that's certainly not what I'd say at all. It's just that in this application, you may want something a little bit bigger in order to maintain the car's sort of very together, very well put together sort of character. Which is why, to us, we recommend the 2.2-litre turbo diesel because you are never going to run out of twist in one of those. And the 2.5-litre petrol is a decent substitute if you do not want an oil burner. But that said, over the week or so I've had this car, I better understand why it is that this vehicle in this particular specification sells so well. This engine is adept at town use, and I find that a lot of CX-5 buyers do tend to just stay in town. This is not really the sort of car that's used to go the miles. For users like that, you usually again end up either in the diesel or the 2.5-litre turbo petrol. But I understand that, for example, if you live in Subang Jaya, like many Subang Jaya housewives tend to, and you need a car to just go from point A to point B that feels comfortable and upmarket and has a good amount of safety and excellent build quality, then you don't really go wrong with any CX-5. But of course, this 2-litre might be most appealing simply because it is slightly more affordable in the lineup, it's more affordable to fuel, etc. Now, does that change my opinion of the matter? Not really, simply because in terms of fuel economy, which is where I think a lot of people think that they'd save more money with the 2-litre over the 2.5 NA, we've been averaging about 10.6, 10.7 kilometers per litre, which is about the same fuel economy that I got from the 2.5-litre, partly because that engine also benefits from things like cylinder deactivation and so on, making it a far more efficient powertrain in terms of its technological capabilities over this. But of course, I do understand that maybe you have a fixed budget. Maybe you need a 2-litre because of company car tax, for example. In which case, the CX-5 2-litre does do pretty well. And I appreciate the fact that with this facelift, Burmaz has seen it fit to fit this model with more standard specification than before and offer the 2-litre with the full suite of Mazda active safety systems. Simply because before, we didn't recommend the 2-litre because of the specification. Now, we can recommend this engine while still benefiting from all of that active safety. That, I think, is something that more car makers really ought to be doing, simply because safety shouldn't be a luxury. This is something that all cars should get, that all customers should benefit from. And like I said, appreciate the way that Burmaz has done things this time around. But overall, I'll say this much. Even though this isn't my favorite engine from Mazda, it's still a very good motor. This is still a very good setup, no matter how you slice it. And even though the 2-litre may not be my favorite engine in the lineup, it still doesn't take away from the fact that the CX-5 is a very good car. Does it mean that the CX-5 is not quite as versatile with the 2-litre than it would be with the 2.5-litre or the turbo diesel? Yes. Will that matter to some buyers? Probably not. Simply because, again, I understand that for those who use these cars primarily in town, this engine is enough. It's just that enough sometimes isn't enough. And that's kind of why this isn't the engine I'd recommend. However, if fuel economy is your primary concern, then you're more likely to be better served by the Honda CR-V hybrid, which marries that 1.5-litre turbocharged powertrain to a hybrid system, which works in a unique way in order to deliver very persistent and consistent performance while maintaining relatively low fuel economy. And of course, if you're looking for the ultimate hybrid SUV, to me, in terms of fuel economy, then unfortunately you're stuck with the Toyota Corolla Cross Hybrid, because even though that car is relatively uninspiring, it is very good on fuel. It's just that that car's traffic jam assistant doesn't quite work all the way to zero, which means as a town car, it is slightly compromised. But if you ask me, there is a very good reason why a lot of motoring journalists, myself included, believe that the Mazda CX-5 is the very best in this segment. This setup, this car is just really well engineered and really well put together. And regardless of which engine you choose from, you're most likely to end up a very happy camper. At least that's been very evident to me throughout the week I've had this car. But ultimately, the choice lies with you. If you were to buy a CX-5, which engine do you think would be the best for you? Let me know in the comments section below. Are you a diesel person like me? And so would you prefer the punch of the 2.2-litre turbo diesel? Are you insane and so you'd prefer the 2.5-litre turbocharged engine because you have too much money to burn? Are you more sensible and prefer the 2.5-litre, or do you think I'm wrong and you think this 2-litre is actually the best engine of the lot? I'd like to hear from you. In any case, that has been our review of the 2024 Mazda CX-5 2.0 High. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can join our new WhatsApp channel. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.